Hi, in this episode I'm going to show you how Gimlet works in the background. So this is going to be a deep dive episode. In the previous episodes you have seen how my demo application was deployed and how if I do a deployment, how it updates the Gitops templates and how it's rolled out to the cluster. So in essence, Gimlet is Gitops. It's a bunch of glue around the Gitops process. And let's explore a little bit what Gitops is. So if Gitops, then there has to be a Git repository where all your manifest, your Kubernetes application descriptors live. And in the settings of Gimlet, you can specify this repository. And my Gitops repository is Gitops-staging. There are Kubernetes manifest files here, and there is one component that synchronizes these YAML files down to the cluster. And that component is Flux. Flux is an open source project backed by Weaveworks, and it's really gaining momentum these days. So if you are into the technology itself, then it's using Flux on the cluster. It's an open source project, and Gimlet uses its container. When you install Gimlet on your cluster, you install an agent, and you also initialize a Flux container. And what Flux does is that it polls your Gitops repository, and if it finds any change, a new commit, then it will synchronize down all your Kubernetes manifest files onto the cluster. So if you look into the Flux logs, you will see a nice heartbeat going on every 5 seconds. It's polling the Git repository. And if we scroll a little bit further up, then we should see our recent deployment. So this was when we deployed just in the beginning of this recording. So let's go back to the Gitops repository because it's very interesting. People implement Gitops in their companies these days, and they all come up with a folder structure. And Gimlet also uses a folder structure which has 3 main folders right now. One is the releases folder. Inside releases, there are the various environments. Now in my Gimlet installation, there is only staging configured, the staging environment, so there is a releases/staging. But if you would have production, then you would have releases/production. And inside this folder, you can see all your applications that are managed by this Gitops controller called Flux. If you look into the Gimlet home page, there are 2 repositories here, and all the related manifests are in this Git repo. So one of my demo apps and my other demo app is here. And demo app is all the YAML files that this repo is using. It's using Customize. This is a fairly new way of templating or customizing Kubernetes YAML files, and if you're not familiar with it, you can definitely look it up. It's part of kubectl today. Customization YAML is the root of my customize templates, which is pointing to some YAML files like a base configuration, and it adds certain overlays. As we configured our repositories, our demo app, for example, when I set the resource requirements, just by setting this value, Gimlet adds the resource requests and resource limits overlays on top of the base configuration of the application. We could actually look this up because in the demo app there's a patches folder, and we could look up the requests, for example. So this is an overlay on top of a base application configuration. Customize works in a way that it uses the identifier, the kind, and the API version, so the deployment that is called demo app, and tries to merge various YAML snippets. So if it merges this YAML snippet down to a base configuration, then the resource requests part is going to be added. There was one more interesting thing with Customize, that it points to a base configuration. So if we go to the root of our Gitops repository, we can see in config all our applications blueprints are stored. So this is the base demo app deployment descriptor. It only specifies a dummy image, as we are using an image overlay on top of this. Now this is customized and you might not be familiar with it, but you could use Gitops outside of Gimlet and not use Customize. You could just put in here your regular Kubernetes manifests. Flux would synchronize that down to your cluster. Or you could use Helm, and in further releases or future releases, Gimlet will also support Helm as well. Customize is just closer to my heart right now than Helm, so I picked that one as the first go-to implementation. So now that we know about the Gitops folder structure and the Gitops repository and the Gitops controller, that is Flux, let's look at my notes. What other things can we talk about to introduce you a little bit more about the core workings of Gimlet. I think I covered these parts, and I'd like to just explain a little bit more how Gimlet and Gitops differs from the traditional CI approach. And that is typically your deployment happens inside CI, and there is a step or two or three at the end of your CI pipeline that deploys your application into various environments. Now, this CI step connects to your cluster, also does some YAML templating, maybe resolving some variables or using some Helm charts, and you inject some variables into that Helm chart. That generates a YAML file that is not actively stored anywhere. Basically, it's just generated on the fly, and then it fed into the Kubernetes cluster. So Gitops is a little bit different in this aspect, because in Gitops this YAML representation is always available, and it's always stored in Git. So there is no intermediate states that might not be stored with your CI approach. So Gitops provides this a nice audit log on one part, and on the other part nice recoverability, as if you are in a disaster recovery scenario, you only have to just take your Gitops repository and do kubectl apply, basically, and you have a restored environment completely. So you just take one environment like staging and you restore from here. While if you use CI as your main glue for your automation, you might have to retrigger each and every job of yours to restore the desired versions. Gitops provides this ability out of the box. And I think that was the first part of this deep dive series. We talked about how Gitops works, what's a Gitops controller, what folder structure is in your Gitops repo, and how what is the database really behind Gimlet.